The reading this morning comes from Genesis chapter 28, and it's going to be a very, very familiar story to many of you. It's Genesis 28 from verse 10, and it reads a little like this. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he had reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And above it stood the Lord. And he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and I will give your descendants the land on which they are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up on a pillar and poured oil on top of it. And he called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. It must have been about this time last year that Alison and I spent the day in Falmouth. Now, we've been to Falmouth many times before, but we did something we've never done previously. We climbed Jacob's ladder. Now, for those who know it, it's this stone staircase that starts just beside the Methodist chapel. And we climbed to the top. We stopped a couple of times to admire the view as we went. But when we got there, it was actually quite a revelation. As I said, I've been to Falmouth many times before. But suddenly, there were new houses, new streets, new architecture, a completely different view of St. Maule's. Now, the story of Jacob and the stairway to heaven is a very familiar story to many people. It's a favourite story in Sunday schools, and many a male-voiced choir have no doubt sung it as well. But this morning I want to look again at this story, but place more emphasis on Jacob and a little less on the ladder. But let's review how we got here. Jacob was in this place because he was on the run. He had deceived both his father and his brother was now threatening to kill him. So Jacob started running. Now, Jacob is about to enter a time of his life where he is either going to be running from something or running to something. But at this moment, we find him at a time where he can stop. He spent 2 days running, 2 days thinking, 2 days pondering, and now he felt safe enough, far enough away from his brother, that he could rest. He takes a stone and he lies down to sleep. I don't know if you've ever spoken to homeless people. but they tell you that the first time that you lie down to sleep on the street, the moment your head hits the pavement, you know that you have reached rock bottom. There's no pun intended. But once you're asleep on the ground, you realise there is nothing left. And he now drifts off into a deep sleep. And he has this vision of God. He hears God speak. He has this theophany. The amazing thing is that God speaks to Jacob at a moment of his greatest desperation. As that famous writer C.S. Lewis wrote, God whispers to us during times of pleasure, but he shouts at us during times of pain. Now God moves to speak, even though Jacob is asleep. Notice that it's all about God and nothing about Jacob. Jacob did nothing, could do nothing to merit God's blessing. And then you think, of all people, why does God choose to speak to Jacob? Have you ever thought of it? Of all the people he chooses to speak to, why him? Because quite frankly, he's not a very nice person at all. But God chooses to speak to him, to use him, and he makes some quite specific promises to him. Notice that reading said, I will give you the land. Your descendants will be like dust of the earth. Through you, all people on earth will be blessed. I will watch over you. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you. He wakes a changed man. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But he wakes up next morning different. Many of us can relate to this story. We sometimes think, why did God choose to speak to me? Why did I choose to listen? Whether it was a moment of great drama or through a slow period of discovery, we change and we become the people we are now. As this story clearly reminds us, God is nearer to us than we sometimes think. Despite the population of the world being somewhere around 7.5 billion people, God is not too busy not to be interested in you and me. At Bethel, Jacob encountered God, and his life began to assume a different perspective. For the story of Jacob's ladder is the gospel of grace in microcosm. Jesus comes to us. He lives our lives, dies for our failures, and returns to eternity. Upon a life I did not live, upon a death I did not die, I stake my whole eternity. This is my hope. But this story made me wonder, what actually does it mean to be a Christian in the 21st century? What defines us as a people? Now, of course, I started thinking about this towards the end of the period when there were lots and lots of party political conferences. And you would hear people, whether they were Scottish nationalists, Welsh nationalists, Young Conservatives, Momentum, Monster Raving Looney Party, no, maybe not them. But if you asked any of these people what they wanted, what they believed, what they hoped to achieve, they could tell you quite specifically. So what's a Christian? We all have our definitions, but I want to share with you just a few of my own thoughts, for better, for worse. If you ask many people outside the church, and even more worrying within the church, they will probably start with a list of things that Christians don't do. They don't do this, they don't believe that, they don't whatever. And it's always a list of negatives. Never a list of positives. I remember back to the late 60s or 70s. That's 1960s and 70s. When I became a Christian first. And I began to wonder what we should do to be Christians. And it usually came up with things, well, we mustn't go to the cinema, we shouldn't go to discos or parties, and the girls question whether they should wear fashionable clothes or makeup. But in other words, it seemed like choosing Christianity equated to choosing to be rather dull. And because of this, because the emphasis Christians often place on practice, others criticize us for being less spiritual than Buddhists or Hindus or whatever. But Christianity is the faith that has kept the deepest thinkers and theologians debating for the last 2,000 years. Christianity is the belief system that inspired its believers to campaign for social justice, abandon slavery, work for peace. Christianity is the faith that has inspired its believers to make some of the greatest art, architecture, and poetry in the world. How can it be boring? Unless, of course, we make it boring. But what is a Christian? A Christian is in favour of love and peace and justice, being good, doing good. But isn't every human being, the vast majority of the world, want the same thing? Christians don't have a monopoly of compassion. But on occasions you find that non-Christians can be better, more generous than Christians. I just want to consider three things. Christians believe something, Christians follow something, Christians live something. We believe that Jesus is Jacob's ladder. In a few short weeks we will celebrate the Incarnation, reminding us that at the very, very heart of what we believe is a mystery. We cannot, we never will understand every aspect of our faith. Because, as Wesley himself wrote, "'Tis mystery all." And becoming a Christian means that we engage in a spiritual journey of discovery. Humanists would argue that by improving both nature and nurture, people will ultimately become better people. Well, we do have universal education, universal health care, social support, but when you look around, do you see the world getting a better place? The social gospel talks about being open to the needs of others. But what we are about is changing people from the inside out, not outside in. This is not about bums on seats. This is about souls in heaven. For only Jesus can make those changes. Christians believe that in the love of God demonstrated in Jesus on Calvary, dying for our weaknesses, our failures, our frailties, our faults, and as the story of Jacob so vividly reminds us, no one is beyond Jesus' love. No one who turns to him will be rejected. Whether you're a thief, a murderer, adulterer, drug dealer, pornographer, human trafficker, no one is beyond the love of Jesus. I do often wonder if some notorious naughty person started turning up to chapel, what would happen? And if they continue to attend, how long would people give them to change their ways? But also, when a person has been changed by Jesus, it doesn't automatically mean that they will accept our chosen lifestyles and they accept the traditions we choose to follow. And a Christian is someone who follows something. We follow the teaching and the example of Jesus and wrestle with the scriptures as we apply them to our daily lives. But in order to stay in a relationship with God, we need to nourish that relationship by spending time in his presence. Christians by nature are very, very busy people, often doing things for others, doing good things. But this is often to the neglect of the spiritual side of our lives. Human beings are spiritual by nature. We are moved by a beautiful sunset. We cry at births and weddings. We have our breath taken away by physical beauty, art, music, ballet. To follow Jesus, we are embarking on a spiritual journey of exploration. So we may read our scriptures daily and pray regularly, but this should also be an internal experience, not just a physical practice. Reading and pondering allows the Holy Spirit to lead us on an inner journey, fostering spiritual growth. Christian spirituality is rooted in the Bible, touching hearts, the very depths of our being, translating his love into concrete choices in our daily lives. This is not just reading the words of the Bible. It's not just saying, I've learned something today. It's not just saying, oh, I see how that all fits in salvation plan. It's not just saying, oh, I've gained a bit of reassurance today. It's allowing the Holy Spirit to explore deeper meanings. Instead of going through your prayer list and requests people have made for us, just sit still. Be silent. Even sit in the dark. Wait for God to speak. Reflect on where you are, on your own personal spiritual journey with Jesus. For God is with you, whether you feel it or not. God is with you, whether you know it or not. God is with you, whether you see it or not. God is with you, whether you sense it or not. A Christian is someone who lives something. Going back to my confusion as a teenager, I realise now it's not about what you actually give up. It's more about what you prioritise. It's not about the clothes you wear, the prayers you repeat, the rituals you perform. We choose to prioritise praise and worship over other activities. We choose to prioritise prayer, meditation and Bible study over other hobbies and pastimes. But we also choose to prioritise forgiveness over anger and resentment. We choose to prioritise serving over selfishness. We prioritise generosity over greed. We prioritise an open hand over a closed fist. So to return to where I began with, what is a Christian? May I humbly offer you a definition for you to ponder and consider. By following Christ in our modern world, a Christian can be truly human, transfigured, changed, transformed into someone who is truly alive, to do, to suffer, even to die, sustained by hope, transformed by grace, confident in the love of God, and helpful to all humanity.